Burdens are lifted at Calvary.
It is to be with you this day, and I hope that you've had a blessed week. Good to see those of our number back with us who have been sick and ill, and continue to pray for those who are struggling at this time. You know, contentment's kind of hard sometimes, isn't it? We tend to be not very contented people for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we don't get what we want out of life. Sometimes we get too much of what we want out of life. Sometimes we feel like other people get things that we think we should get. Sometimes we desire things that other people have. Just a lot of reasons that we're not content with things. And to find contentment in your life is a wonderful and a great thing to have. You know, I think there's things in my life that I'm very content with, things I'm very happy with. There's a few things in my life I'm not real content with. Some of them I need to learn to be content with, because some of those things are just not going to change in my life. And so I need to learn contentment. And that's something we need to think about a little bit today. Help me to want what I have. Isn't that an amazing thing, to want what you have? You know, I've often... when people look at your life from the outside, sometimes people will look at your life and they'll think, boy, I wish I had what that guy has, you know. He's got a whatever, or she's got a whatever, and she has this, and he has that, and you know, they're looking at it like, boy, I wish I had all those things. And the person that has all those things is looking at somebody else who's got a real simple life, and they're thinking, man, I wish I had a simple life like that, and didn't have all this junk I had to take care of, right? So, I mean, a lot of it's perspective, isn't it? How we view ourselves is sometimes a lot different than how the world views us. And so, you know, sometimes people might look at your life and think, oh, that guy's good. You know, that guy's got it all. That guy's got to be content. That guy's got to be happy. That woman's got to be happy. She has to be content. But really, in reality, they're not. They're miserable people, right? For whatever reason, misery is their life, and they just can't seem to find happiness or contentment in their life. And so Jesus wants us to have that. And we need to have that. To be effective Christians and to be effective as God's children, we need to have that. You know, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, he says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me, and he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content. You know, I think for Paul, this had to be difficult. Here's a man that healed other people. Here's a man who took care of other people's afflictions. Here's a man that God saw perform wondrous miracles within the lives of people who were sick and lame and even dead. There's a man who knew God could do all things. He had been demonstrated in his life that God could do all things. And yet when he comes to God to say, take care of this thing for me, there was no healing to be found. God said, I'm not going to take it away. I'm not going to do away with it. You're going to have to live with this problem, whatever it is. And there's been tons of speculation about what it is. I have no clue. But whatever it is, he says, you're going to have to learn to live with it, right? And then Paul says, he says, therefore I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. You know, I've known very few people in my life that I felt were really, really content people. Really, really content. You know, how do you know when somebody's content? What would be your gauge of that? What's your measurement of contentment? You know, to me, a content person is somebody who's not really seeking to add any other thing, any other device, anything into their lives. They're simply happy with their life the way that they live it. They're happy with things the way that they are. They're not looking to expand or get bigger or get better. They're happy with it. They're content with it. You know, my grandmother was the person I think about when I think about this. I speak about her a lot. But she was one person in my life that was truly content with almost absolutely nothing. She was content. She was happy. She had her life. She loved her Lord, and everything else to her was just irrelevant. She was a truly content person, owning very, very little. I remember she had this old Zenith television set on 4 legs, had to click the channels by hand, black and white. She was happy with that television set forever. Never wanted another one, never wanted an upgrade, didn't care about it. She was happy. You know, contentment is something that we have to find within ourselves. Paul said, I am well content. You know, I think sometimes we're kind of like Eeyore, ain't we? I love Eeyore. You know, sometimes I just think I am Eeyore. You know, I mean, it was funny. My dad was reading this story to my niece many years ago. My dad was reading this story to my niece, and he called him Eyesore. And I know it doesn't sound real funny right now. When he said it, it was just so funny. Me and my sister laughed till we cried. And every time I think of Eeyore, I think about that story. But Eeyore says, end of the road, right? Not much hope of things getting better, right? Sounds like Saturday at my house, you know, poor Eeyore, right? We're kind of that way sometimes, right? We're kind of Eeyores. We're like, you know, I kind of deserve what I got, and I ain't got much, but, you know, I kind of deserve that, and just need to be happy, right? And but that's really not what contentment really is. Paul says in Philippians 4, he says, not that I speak from want. And I really like this passage, and I highlighted that word learned, because I don't think contentment is something that we're born with. I mean, we got a lot of little babies in here, and I love our little babies. You know, and if you said, you know, is KJ content? No, I mean, she's not, because she's always wanting something else, or Ridge, or Jace, or, you know, Val's coming up, or even our teenagers, right? Because they're at that point in their life where they want more, right? They want, you know, they're not really content. They're always looking for something else, wanting something else, desiring something else. They want that other toy. They want that other, right? And so they haven't really, it's not something that we learn. I don't think we're born with it. But Paul says, not that I speak from want. He says, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, Paul says again, he says, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. But I love what Paul says. I've learned to be content. And when I looked at that verse, I thought, how do I learn? How does Rex learn to be content? You know, and contentment is one of those things that it's not just a material thing. Contentment's not just about stuff. It's not. Contentment's about a lot of different things. It's about our emotionally, it's about us spiritually, it's about a ton of different things. If you read my bulletin article, it's really funny because what I kind of got on this sermon or thinking about the sermon was because of my daughter, who's not here, Sydney, but she watches the show, reads this lady's books, this Marie Kondo, I think's her name, if any of y'all know who that is. And she's a lady who talks about tidying up your life, and I've kind of used it in my article, if you read my article. And she has like these 6 steps to like decluttering your life and tidying up your life. And the 6th step is, does it spark happiness? So all the time when I'm with Sydney, and I got all kinds of junk. You know, I got more junk. I don't even know all the junk I got. I mean, I got junk I don't even know I have, right? I mean, if you showed it to me, I'd be like, that's not my junk. It's absolutely, it's in your attic. It's your junk. It's not my junk. You know, I don't even know. But you know, when we're doing stuff, we're going through stuff, and Sydney's always about decluttering and cleaning stuff, and me and her are going through whatever, and she'll pull something up and she'll say, Dad, does this spark happiness? You know? And if I say, well, no, then she'll say, well, you need to throw it away. Because if it doesn't spark happiness, you need to get rid of it, right? And I'm like, and so I was thinking about that a lot, you know, things in my life that spark happiness. What makes me happy? What makes me smile? What brings me joy? What brings me something to my life? What adds something to my life? You know, those are the things I need in my life. And I thought about that a lot, and I thought about this idea, and that's kind of what got me on this sermon, was kind of that thought. Does this spark happiness? And if you really think about your life and just go through your day, you know, what's the things in your life that spark your happiness? You know, what makes you smile? What makes you laugh? What makes you happy? What's the things in your life that spark your happiness? I started asking myself that question a little bit. You know, what makes me happy? What sparks my happiness? And I thought, you know, I need to learn to be happy with things. I need to learn contentment. And I was like, how do I do that? How do you learn that? You know, how do you learn to be content? You know, Bill wrote a book. Our elder here, Bill Path, wrote a book. You ought to read it. And Bill gave me this book, and he said, the reason I'm giving you this book is because a lot of the things you say from the pulpit are the things I say in this book. And when I read the book, I'm like, a lot of things I say from the pulpit are in this book, interestingly enough. And a lot of what Bill talks about is this idea of our value in humanity. And this idea that we're in this massive stream of humanity from the beginning of time to the end of the time, and that humanity builds upon itself, and that every one of us play a role in that, regardless of how insignificant or small we think our role might be. We all play a role in this flow of humanity throughout time, and that we build upon each other throughout our experiences and our learning and our knowledge and our shared things, that we build upon one another, and we're all part of this. And it's something that I've always said from the pulpit, and I believe it, and I want to tell our kids that, and that's the one thing that I need to learn to be content with, is that I have value within myself. I have intrinsic value. I should have said that instead of inherent. I have intrinsic value. I have value that just because I am who I am. We don't often think of ourselves that way, do we? Because sometimes we think, well, I'm not good for anything. If I just disappeared off the face of the earth, nobody would even know I was gone, right? Nobody would even miss me. Nobody would even know I didn't exist anymore. I don't contribute anything. I don't have purpose or meaning or all these things that we associate with what our life should be. And yet Jesus Christ said, you are important, you are valuable. I died on a cross for you. I purchased you, I bought you, and because of that, you have a value just because you are you. Not because of your name, not because of your value or your worth or the things that you own. You have value just because you exist. That's one thing that we really need to think about when we think about contentment, is that the value I have within myself, it's something that I want more than anything. I try to I don't know the right word. I want our kids to know that. Because I think so many times when you're a kid, when you're a child, when you're a teenager, when you're growing up, you put so much value on all the things that are around you. Do I dress like that other person, or do I have the stuff that other person has, or, is my family, we put all this value on all these external things, and we forget that you have value just because you're you. And I think when we begin to understand that, we understand that contentment starts within us. Contentment starts with this knowledge that I'm valuable, that I have worth, and I have purpose, and I have value, and it doesn't relate it to the things that exist within my life or necessarily the relationships that exist in my life. It comes down to me. I need to find contentment within my uniqueness, within my value. I'm not ever going to be like you, and you're never going to be like me. We're never going to be that way. Each one of us has this value within us. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds. Jesus really says, listen, consider these birds that don't do anything, that don't contribute anything, and yet look how I take care of them. So think of your value. Aren't you more valuable than many sparrows? The scripture says, aren't you more valuable? Sure you are. The number of things with contentment, it starts within me. Within me. Am I happy with me? That's probably one of the hardest questions to ever answer, honestly, isn't it? Am I happy with me? It's hard to answer because I'm multifaceted, and you are too. There's a million aspects to our life, from our spiritual side to our emotional side to the relationships we have to our jobs, to the things we possess or possess us. There's a lot of things to our life. Are you happy with you? Do you like yourself? Do you love yourself? We hate to say that, don't we? Sounds conceited to say I love myself. But I hope we do, because we have to love ourselves in order for other people to love us. We have to find a redeeming quality, a value within ourselves that we value so that other people will value it too. If you want to love, love yourself. If you want to be loved, love yourself. Be that person that others desire, want to be around, want to emulate. Our value, our intrinsic value. The other thing that I looked at here was to learn to live in the present. You know, I've done good things in my past, and a lot of things I'm really proud of. But I've done some things I wish I had done differently. I don't know about you. You know, my past has some regret. I think if you're of any age, you can probably have some regret in your past. I know I do. And you know, my future's a little apprehensive. I don't really know what tomorrow's going to bring or how I'm going to handle it or if I'm going to do the things I should do or act the way I should act or make the right decisions. A little scary, isn't it? Tomorrow's a little scary. It is to me. I think it is to all of us just a little bit. But today, this minute, this present is perfect right now, right here in this place. Sharing this room with you and breathing the air you breathe, this is a perfect place right now. You know, so many times we get lost in the regrets and we get apprehensive about the future and we forget to enjoy this time, this minute, this existence that we have. Have you ever sat back and just breathed the air and felt that on your skin and understand how miraculous and how marvelous you are and how marvelously made you are and how much God loves you and what God surrounded you with, the beauty and the wonder of creation that God surrounded you with because you are so special? Do you ever find contentment in just existing? Not necessarily in performing or in making something happen or accomplishing a goal. We're so goal-oriented sometimes, aren't we? We set these goals. We got to get done. We got to hurry. We got to get finished. We got to get this the way it's supposed to be. And sometimes we forget to stop and enjoy now. You know, I was sitting back there with Cody Val a minute ago, and he was holding her. And you know, in my mind, I thought, and I know it sounds corny, but it is kind of corny. I mean, I'm kind of corny, so, you know, bear with me. But, you know, I was sitting there thinking, I thought, well, what I would give to get a hold of one of my children again for just a few minutes at that age. Now, knowing what I know now, because I wouldn't be worried about their tomorrow, and I wouldn't be worried. I would just want to hold them and love them in the minute, in the second, in the time. I would love to do that because as a parent, I think I was always, part of my mind was always worried about tomorrow and the next day and what they were going to do and how I was going to take care of it and how I was going to manage it and how we were going to pay for things. And God, I miss so much because I just forgot to hold them and love them in that minute. Learn to live now. You know, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next week. I don't know. Getting old, anything's possible, right? But the truth is that I know today. I know I have today. And I want to enjoy it, and I want to live it, and I want to love the people that are in my life, and I want to be content in this minute. You know what I'm saying? Learn to be content. We have to teach ourselves to do it. You know, we got to recognize our own uniqueness. I love Teddy Roosevelt. He said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." I said, what a great quote. Comparison is the thief of joy. To compare your life to somebody else, to compare your experiences to someone else's experiences, to compare, it steals it away from you. It steals it away from you. You know, when I was a kid, my mom and dad divorced, and you know, me and my dad, we would go to the lake about every time he had me. We would go to Lake Powell, and we had this old camper on this pickup, old little 17-foot Arkansas Traveler boat, and we slept in a tent out under the stars. We didn't have a tent. We slept on a tarp out under the stars, and we'd be driving in to Lake Powell, which is where we went. We'd be driving into Lake Powell to go do that, and man, we'd be driving down the road, and I'd see all these big fancy fifth-wheel campers and RVs with big boats on them, and all these people with all this fancy setting up in these campgrounds and everything. And I was always like, man, why can't we have that, Dad? You know, why can't we have all that stuff? But you know, some of the best experiences of my life was sleeping under those stars on a tarp, eating hot dogs cooked on a campfire. And I think now I know I was probably happier than all them people in them big fancy RVs with them big boats. But I wasn't smart enough to understand it. You know, uniqueness is joy. You don't have to be like everybody else. You have to be like you. The things that make you happy, the things that make you content. Why do you look at other people and think, if I could be like them, I'd be happy? You don't know if they're happy. You're just making a guess. You're the only person who knows what makes you happy. And I tell people that all the time. You know, Clyde's not here this morning, but Clyde gave me the best piece of advice maybe that anybody's ever given me. You know, Clyde and Carolyn, they traveled, they did all that stuff, they went all them places and all these different things. And you know what Clyde told me one time? And he's told a lot of y'all the same thing because I've heard y'all say it. He said, when you find something that makes you happy, do it. He said, because next month, next year, you won't want to do that anymore. You know, he was right. If you find something that makes you happy, do it. I mean, as long as it's not immoral, impure, and illegal, none of that stuff. I'm going to qualify this statement a little bit here. It says church, right? But do that because that's you. That's your uniqueness. That is you. And if it makes you happy, then do. If roping a cow makes you happy, go rope cows, right? I don't want to do it, but it's okay. I'm all for you doing it, right? If being on a boat makes me happy, then I should go be on a boat, and you don't have to do that. You know, the truth is that every one of us is unique, and every one of us is special, and every one of us is unique in God's eyes and our own eyes, and we need to find our own contentment and not try to duplicate somebody else's. In Timothy, he says, we have food and covering, and with these we shall be content. Paul tells Timothy, he says, what else you need? Right? What else do you need? You know, in my whole life, I've never went hungry, that it couldn't be avoided, and I've never went without shelter, unwillingly. In my whole life, God's always provided these things for me. You know, be content. Recognize your own uniqueness. Don't try to compare yourself to other people or other events. You need to be you. You know, this seems stupid, but man, this has been the story of my life so many times. Fake it until you make it. You know, I mean, that sounds really ignorant, but I promise you, this has saved my life. You know, there's times in my life spiritually, I didn't want to come to church. I didn't like the preacher. I didn't like whatever. I really didn't want to come, and yet I did. Even though I didn't really want to be here, I'm just being honest. I sat out there a lot longer than I sat up here, than I stood up here. But you know what? I always came. I always showed up every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. I always showed up. And eventually, it got back to the point I wanted to be here again. You know, sometimes in life, habit brings us through things. Sometimes you just got to be that way. Listen to what he says in Galatians. He says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this we also reap. For the one who sows in his own flesh, from the flesh reap corruption. The one who sows to the Spirit, from the Spirit reap eternal life. Listen to what he says at the end. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. Sometimes you're going to come through spaces in your life, spells in your life where you really might not be happy. Bad things are happening, and bad things do happen, and it just takes our joy and it takes our contentment. It steals that away from us. But I promise you, if you stay focused on the things that are important on your life and Christ's love for you and the church and things that matter, and you stay focused on that and you push forward and you fake it until once again, joy and contentment will come into your life. The Bible says he'll turn those tears into joy. Sometimes we just got to get past it. Sometimes we just got to hang in there and stay in there and make it happen until we feel it again, until it happens again. Life isn't always good, but it can be good. Paul tells us in Galatians 8, what does he say? He says, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And so many times in my life, I've held my hat on that verse. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. There's been times in my life that I haven't been content. Times in my life I've been sorrowful. I've been heartbroken. I've been grief-stricken. But I always made it through because I always knew God was going to take care of it. Tomorrow was going to be better. I could get through it. Sometimes in life, that's what we have to do. Sometimes we just have to fake it until we make it. And I think that's perseverance. That's steadfastness. That's staying in it. But in the end, we have to choose to be content. You have to make that decision in your life. You know, I'm going to be honest with you. If I could share the innermost parts of my heart this morning, which I can't do, if I could share the innermost secrets of my heart this morning, I could share some things with you that I'm really bothered about. things that if I dwell about it, if I think about it, it steals all the joy from my being. But I choose not to let it do that, because I choose contentment. I choose joy. I choose happiness. Sometimes we have to make that decision. Are you going to let a little bad ruin all your good? Are you going to let a little bad take away your joy in your life? Ruin the good that is in your life? You and I both know one bad experience in your day can ruin your whole day. Do we all know that? You can have a perfect day, and one bad thing can ruin your whole day. It can steal your whole joy. But you decide to let it do that. The older I get, I know I use that a lot, but it does affect me. The older I get, the more I realize that every minute I'm sad, every minute I'm angry, every minute I'm upset is one more minute in my life that I'll never get back to be happy. And I'm tired of bad things and bad experiences stealing my joy. And I choose not to let that happen, because I want to be content. I want to be joyful. I want to be happy. I want to love my life and love the people in my life. That's my decision. In Hebrews 13, it says, make sure your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. Be content with what you have. Find happiness and joy in your life. Don't compare yourself to other people. Be the person that you need to be. Jesus wants you to have an abundant and a joyful and a wonderful life, doesn't he? You know, I want to end with this verse. I want you to really look at this verse, what Paul says. Paul says, godliness is actually I just love how he put this verse. Godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. Have you ever looked at that before? Godliness is actually a means of great gain, Paul says, when accompanied by contentment. If we have to be content for godliness to be of great gain to us, because if we're not content, then all those things that the Bible tells us is bad all flood into our lives. Envy, jealousy, strife, all those things enter our life. Contentment is part of being godly. It's part of godliness. It's part of what makes godliness a means of great gain. If you really want your spirituality, you really want your godliness, you really want that to matter in your life, then be content, people. Be content. Because a lack of contentment in our lives drives us to all kinds of sin. All kinds of sin. Adultery, theft, jealousy, envy, all come from what? Not being content. Don't they? So find contentment within your life. Help me to want what I have. Help me to want the spouse I have. Help me to want the children I have. Help me to want the job I have. And help me to want the things that I have. Help me to want what I have in my life, and teach me to be content, and help me to be content with what God has so richly blessed me with and blessed you with. Right? If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?